Well, turns out I have a free day. I'm going to try and get through this book, as many chapters as I possibly can, so expect a lot of these videos over the next couple of weeks, but hopefully we can finally put this book to bed and maybe move on to something else. Because quite frankly, I do not want to be doing this any longer than necessary. And quite frankly, I've reached the conclusion I really don't need to go any further. But in the interest of basically being fair, and the fact that I have challenged Pete to a debate, I will prove to him and others that I have not only read this book myself personally, but, you know, I've got it on camera, and that I am, you know, responding to a lot of his claims in essentially real time as we, you know, go through the book. So let's begin then, shall we? Chapter 12. Watch the MD scramble as he tries to jam a round ball into a square hole. Let me guess, more MD bashing. To better understand the last chapter, we have to have a working knowledge of the concept of metaphysics. For example, the word metaphysical conjures up in the case and thoughts of most people the thoughts of a Ouija board and seances. In reality, metaphysical phenomena are much more mundane and commonplace. We just don't recognise them such because we haven't thought about the subject much, or I mean ever. I mean, when was the last time you and a friend of yours sat down over a couple of beers and talked about metaphysics? Webster defines metaphysics as speculation upon questions that are unanswerable to scientific observation, analysis, or experiment. Things that you have never ever done, Pete. You have never ever done some form of analysis, you know, observation, testing on your treatments that you prescribe. No one has. This is why you are called a quack for prescribing such nonsense. This is why only 2 chapters ago you were complaining about the fact that you can't prove one of your core laws, which is supposedly at the core of your naturopathy and homeopathic medicine. You don't know how it works. So what am I meant to think, Pete? What am I and others meant to think? That just shows that you are a quack. If you would like first-hand experience of a metaphysical phenomenon, I can give you one right now. Ready? Okay. Think about an open-minded, humble MD. Wait a minute, that's too hard. Here's an easier one. Think about a red rose. There, you just did it. Thought itself, being the subjectable answer by scientific experiment, falls under the definition of a metaphysical phenomenon. Where do these thoughts come from? How are we created? What is their purpose? Scientists are stumped by these questions like these and do not have no methodology with which to explore them. Well, I think that's more the realm of philosophers. I think, more than anything. But we do know how a lot of these things happen. They are chemical reactions to our brains. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff we still don't know or understand about our body. But we are learning more and more. And guess what? The more we learn, the more you're proved wrong, Pete. I'm sorry, but that's the case. Now remember, the world that alliopaths live in is limited to that which doesn't exist and can be observed and measured objectively. To them, it can't be measured. If it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. This means that everything outside the keen of the microscope, telescope, and every other measuring instrument known to humankind is not even worth considering. Yes, because you can't measure it. You need to, and if there was a phenomenon observed, like say a doctor observed the fact that patients eating toffees were resistant to this type of disease, what he would have to do then is, if he couldn't measure it under a microscope, then he would have to find another way to measure it. He would actually have to measure and test and perform double-blind tests to prove that his theory was accurate and correct, that these people eating toffees were immune to this certain disease or were cured from it. Where's your test, Pete? Where's your data and information? Because so far you've had 64 pages and all you've done is complain about MDs, say that your core principle, you don't know how it works. You've admitted that another core principle, your diluting principle, goes against the law of physics, because somehow instead of diluting something, making it weaker, you are making the claim that it becomes stronger. I'm sat here in absolute confusion, Pete. I really, really am. And I'm sorry, but I just am. Now, yes, you are. To the allopath, love, hate, hope, joy, indignation, surprised I include this one, thought, and even consciousness itself are all unobjective phenomena, and therefore can have no separate identity apart from the biochemical engine, the human body, that they are associated with. The allopath, especially the psychiatrist, love is solely the result of biochemical reactions, as are all of these emotions. Conscious itself to the allopath is a mere function of biochemistry. Okay. I'm failing to see why it's so important as to biochemistry. Unless he's basically going to make the case that if you take medicine while you're in anger mode, then it doesn't work. I think he is about to make that case. Their reasoning goes like this: because consciousness can be altered with drugs, and because consciousness has never been objectified with a measuring device, it therefore does not exist independently of biochemistry of the body. Furthermore, such consciousness is the function of biochemistry. When biochemistry stops, so does consciousness. Yes, that means when someone's died, essentially, Pete. And this is why and how psychiatry came into being. No, it really didn't. There are more reasons than just we can alter people's emotions with chemicals. No, there was more reasons to it than that, Pete. Where are we? Yep, the psychiatrist tries to alter their patient's consciousness with drugs because to them, consciousness is just a biochemical phenomenon. I bet you never knew that. If most people knew that the psychiatrist was of the belief that it is the biochemistry alone that creates feelings, even consciousness itself, I doubt they would ever employ their services again. Oh, so another facet of modern medicine and treatment that Pete doesn't agree with. Why? Oh, because it's not naturopathic. Conversely, holistic physicians believe that biochemistry is the function of consciousness, or another way of saying it, we believe that consciousness creates biochemistry. Okay? Not the other way around, Pete, which we've already firmly scientifically established that is the case. Or another way of saying it, we believe that biochemistry creates consciousness. To the holistic physician, consciousness inhabits and animates the body when the person is alive, and it leaves the body when the person dies. It is the consciousness itself which directs all the chemical and physiological reactions in the body. Consciousness tells the cells how and when to divide. No, it doesn't read about how cells work, and they've all got sort of their own internal control system. It tells the stomach how to digest food. No, there is nothing that directs the body solely. There is not this thing you are scared, simply scared of calling it a soul, Pete. Instead, you're calling it a vital force. So that's basically New Age woo for you. How the blood to fix a cut, bodies decompose after death because the consciousness is no longer present to keep them intact. Not that the fact that the body has stopped because it was unable to continue the process of creating those chemicals, because if one part of the body stops working, it will affect the other parts of the body. To the misguided reductionist allopath, you've now added first of all, you started calling them allopaths, and why that's separate, and we've already went over in pretty much the second video why calling them that's wrong. He's then added reductionist to it. He's now calling them misguided. You're just adding to the word jumble in front of them. Consciousness, the soul, and the subtle energy meridians that are affected by acupuncture, the laws of homeopathy, etc., etc., are just misguided speculative folly. I mean, where's the proof? Indeed, Pete, where is the proof? Well, it turns out there is proof of the metaphysical phenomenon. Oh, good! Evidence! But it is conversely dismissed by the allopaths because it is partly incomparable with their worldview. So you're basically saying, oh, I have evidence, but they're not going to accept it because it's incomparable to their worldview. This is ridiculous, quite frankly. If you have a theory and you can prove that it's right and that it works, it will be accepted as scientific fact, Pete. That is the world we live in. It's not the one you seem to be living in, though. Anyway, he continues, kind of like telling General George Armstrong Custer that the Sioux, the Cheyenne, and the Avaho were good and decent people who just had as much right to live as he did. He simply did not want to hear it. Maybe it went against his worldview so much that he simply could not hear it, more's the pity. So basically you're comparing MDs to the genocide of the Indians. Wow. And I thought you were meant to be sending evidence, not fallacious arguments. The proof of the spiritual and metaphysical, oh, he's added spiritual now, that slipped in, does not come from machine or measuring equipment, and I doubt that it ever could. It comes from the individual experience only. Well, individual experience is what we call it's what we call anecdotal evidence. That's what we call it. If someone comes and goes, I've seen a ghost, congratulations, that's anecdotal evidence. Do you have any photographs, proof, or actual video? Or, you know, and then can we go back to this site and can we recreate the conditions? Can we actually, you know, recreate the conditions to see this ghost? No, you can't measure it. And unfortunately, if you can't measure it, then I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. The human body/mind is the instrument used to measure the parameters of the unseen metaphysical and spiritual phenomena. Think about it. If the soul exists, then it is in me and you. If the soul is inside me, then I must be able to experience it with the equipment of my own body. And so it is that the yogis of Tamil Nadu in India and Native Americans, indigenous cultures all over the world, and the metaphysical branches of most world religions have developed techniques through which usually unseen metaphysical and spiritual realities are observed and experienced individually. Basically meaning anecdotal evidence. And anecdotal evidence is not comparable to any scientific research or standards we have. It is nothing. It can basically just be dismissed because it is one person's, you know, belief or opinion, and it can be just dismissed. There is a problem, however, here, and the personal nature of the metaphysical experiment make it virtually impossible to prove it to someone else. Congratulations, Pete, you've just answered the question. Here is a simple example. Do you love your mother? If you answered yes, then please go ahead and prove it. Now prove that you love your mother. Can't you do it? Can you? See what I mean? Well, I'd suspect you'd be able to prove it by your actions more than anything, you know? That would certainly be one way. But again, this is Pete just making ridiculous arguments. No, you can't. See what I mean. In your heart, you know that you love your mother because there is nothing that you can't do to prove it to anybody else because it is partly personal experience. And feelings, right, that you just described are not the same as actual physical phenomena. Right? You are talking of your medicine. Remember, let's get back to reality here. This is meant to be a science book about medicine and how his version of, you know, holistic medical treatment is meant to be far better than MD's. So far he has presented nothing, as instead abandoned actually trying to prove something maybe like, you know, his herbalistic medicine to a contemporary medicine that actually exists, that is used in treatment. He can't, because he can't prove it. And why? Because there is a risk of failure in that. Now let's take the concept one step further. What if you were able, through intense prayer or through near-death experience, to leave your body and have a direct personal experience of your soul and or subtle spiritual realms, which the mystics say exist? When you come back to your senses, could you prove that you have just happened to you? No, furthermore. Prejudice being what it is, if a yoga master or a Christian mystic or a shaman was able to raise the dead, well, there would be a lot of actual evidence, because you'd say, hey, I've just raised this guy from the dead, let me prove it to you, let me do it again. That will be evidence. And then guess what? We could set tests, we could perform observations. You know, we could put this guy in this dead body in an MRI scanner, we could see what's happening internally. But, you know, Pete just doesn't think of these things. Or make objects appear, or out of thin air, or completely stop their breathing and heartbeat for days at a time, and then start them again as if nothing had happened. A scientist would argue that it was some sort of trickery or sleight of hand or cunning deception or something. Well, yes, because what you've just described would be exactly that type of thing that a scientist would jump to. So unless you actually had actual physical proof of being able to do such things, and then, you know, we could actually test them. You know, there's this thing called the James Randi Foundation that is giving, I think, you know, $10,000 to any psychic that can prove that they have actual real powers, and so far not one person's actually come forward to be able to prove it. But there you go. Any explanation of the metaphysical phenomenon to them must fit inside their limited worldview or be dismissed without further inquiry. Yes, because if someone came to you these claims that they can raise the dead, which is an extraordinary claim, any claim of that nature would need to be backed up by extraordinary evidence. And evidence that is made, claims that are made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So instead of just accepting the possibility, so you want them to accept there's a possibility. Why not present them with evidence, Pete? Because that's what you should be doing if you want to convince the medical community, but you don't. That homeopathic medicine really does work, or that acupuncture meridians are real, or that there is a vital force that animates the physical body, or that the laying of the hands can really create a positive psychological change, or that there may be more than life to meet that meets the eye, the reductionist allopath close-mindedly tries to jam a round ball of a metaphysical phenomenon into a square box of their limited world view. Or more often than not, they just pretend that the ball is not even there. You think I'm wrong, put this in your pipe and smoke it. Okay, so these are his supposed personal testimonials. In 1995, I had an office in Massachusetts on Cape Cod. I was practicing naturopathy and homeopathy and had a small but robust patient base. One day, a husband and wife brought their 9-year-old daughter to see me. She had been diagnosed with a condition called reflex somatic dystrophy. It had a curious neurological condition that is supposed to be incurable. She had it in her legs, and her experience of the illness was so that if you touched her gently on the leg, or it felt her as if you would just hit her with a hammer. Not fun. She'd been treated at a children's hospital in Boston for a number of years, and after everything she said and done, they could offer was painful physical therapy, which was what she had once every 4 weeks. To make a long story short, I took her on as a patient and analysed her case and gave her 3 doses of homeopathic medicine made from a plant. The total cost of the medicine was $10. Now for the good part, in 3 days it completely cured the condition. Right, I'm going to stop you there, Pete. Who was this girl? What was her name? Do you have a file on her? Do you have a record of the symptoms that she was going through? Do you have the fact that her symptoms, that what you claim she was suffering from? You know, all these sudden questions suddenly start popping up when these guys start, hey, we cured this person magically. Well, yeah, I'm sure you did. Being only a few years out of medical school at the time, I was a little taken aback by her rapid recovery and consulted her parents to wait a few weeks to see if her condition would relapse. It did not. The cure was permanent. It was awesome. A few weeks later, she excitedly went back to the Children's Hospital in Boston for a monthly physical treatment. Because her condition was so rare, and because Children's Hospital is teaching a fallacy, every time she was there, she was seen by an attending physician and about 10 students. Well, if I was taken aback by her recovery, they were dumbfounded by it. They asked her parents what they had done differently for the child to get such a remarkable result. When her parents told the doctors that they had taken her to a naturopath who had prescribed a homeopathic medicine, they all got up and left the room. They did not want to hear it. And not one of them called me to discuss the case. How professional, how compassionate, how open-minded. Somebody cures an incurable condition right in the front of their own eyes, and they don't want to know about it. There ought to be a law. Right, okay. An incurable condition that you've just said you've cured. There are lots of holes straight away. What I've already just said, but posted holes in this story. Where is this girl now? What were those doctors actually saying? Did they, re-examine her? What were their thoughts on it? Can you, let's say if we found another patient with the exact same condition, could your drug work again? Have you done it since on another person with this same condition? There's so much holes in this, and that's purely basic questions from someone who isn't a scientist, right? If there was an actual, scientist or doctor, I guarantee there would be thousands more questions that they would ask that he wouldn't be able to answer. Alright, so here's another one. Again, this is all anecdotal evidence as well, Pete. A few years later, a middle-aged woman came to see me who had a tumour in her breast. I listened to her story, reviewed her objective lab work, and theorised that the tumour was most likely the side effect she was taking for menopause called Primerin. The FDA has classified Primerin as a carcinogen, and is one of its documented side effects is breast cancer. She stopped taking the drug and took a homeopathic treatment and started a sophisticated naturopathic program. 3 weeks later, she went back to a doctor for a follow-up mammogram. When the nurse brought the new films into the doctor, he yelled at her for bringing him what he thought were the wrong ones. Because not only that the tumour had gone, but the breast tissue was no longer fibrous and unhealthy. It couldn't possibly be the same patient, but it was. There were the correct films and the tumour had gone. Had it stayed, and has stayed gone for 20 years now. This is an interesting case for a number of reasons, as menopause is not a disease, it is a time of life. Her MD had prescribed a synthetic carcinogen pharmaceutical agent for a non-medical condition, and she got breast cancer, which was documented side effect of the drug. And then she stopped taking the drug, started my treatment, and the tumour went away. Coincidence? No. Was the doctor repentant? No. He was brought up on medical he was brought up on medical malpractice charges? No. He did not call me to discuss my treatment? No, of course not. Again, the exact same questions to your previous one apply. There's so many questions you could just add that literally poke holes. Where is this woman now? You know, what were her treatments? You know, what was going on inside her body? There's so many questions that, you know, a scientist would ask. And even me, again, the same questions I asked at the beginning of the last one still apply. This not answered. This is just anecdotal evidence. This should not be convincing in the slightest. And people who say that, oh, this is evidence, no, it's not evidence. You know, these could be lies and made up. There could be no such thing as this girl or this old woman. So anyway, he continues. In 1995, a doctor named Walter Metz discovered that he could make mice develop type 2 diabetes by eliminating chromium from their diets. Chromium is an occurring mineral like calcium or zinc. The ridiculousness is that type 2 diabetes is a genetic disease, persists today, and is an absolute perfect example of the closed-minded, mind-blowing pig-headedness that runs rampant through the MD profession. As a rule, MDs completely disregard any facts that run counter to their way of thinking over and over again, even if those facts have been proven to be true with the scientific technique that they hold in such high regard. I don't know anything about this guy. We don't know. This could be another case of it was a quack who came up and claimed that he could. We don't know. Again, this is bogus bullshit. That's all it is. They are the hypocrites, and they have caused a massive amount of suffering because of it. Oh, by the way, my colleagues and I regularly eliminate the signs and symptoms of type 2 diabetes approximately 3 months in 100% of people who have the diagnosis. As type 2 diabetes is a simple nutrient deficiency. When we deliver the proper nutrients to those suffering from it, and they get out of the way and let their body fix itself. The body fixes itself, what a concept. Oh, by the way, one patient with type 2 diabetes will generate approximately $400,000 of income for doctors, hospitals and drug companies that manage their treatment over the course of 20 years. That's not the case at all if you look up the treatment for type 2 diabetes. And again, there are different types of type 2 diabetes, but you know, this guy doesn't care, as has already been said before. 3 months of nutritional treatment eliminate the same cost will cost approximately $750. $750 is still a lot of money, Pete. In 1979, while working for the Yikers Premium Research Center in Atlanta, Dr. Joel Walsh discovered that cystic fibrosis was not limited to humans. We know this. This isn't new. He discovered that the rhesus monkey could also get CF. Furthermore, he proved and published that CF was caused by a nutrient deficiency in the pregnant mother. If the pregnant mother monkey was deficient in the mineral selenium, her babies were born with CF. If the mother was replete with selenium, none of the babies had CF. And for these breakthroughs, research findings, Dr. Walsh was suddenly dismissed and fired from Yakes. Why? 2 reasons. Well, I don't know this. This, again, remember, Dr. Joe Walsh was not a human doctor. He was a veterinarian. He has no actual medical training when it comes to humans. Let me just remember that. 1. So this is one of the supposedly 2 reasons. The popularly held notion that medical science is that nothing can alter the expression of a genetic disease. So even when provided with direct and irrefutable evidence to the contrary, the MDs at Yucca's turn a blind eye to Walsh's findings. Selenium, being a natural occurring substance, cannot be patented, so there is no money in being made to use to prevent cystic fibrosis. Right, okay. Can you provide any evidence, Pete, that this was the reason why he was fired, and not because he was a veterinarian saying that, hey, if this happens in monkeys, can it also happen in humans? But here's the thing, if you know anything about cystic fibrosis, you'll know that it is a genetic disease, and this guy refuses to admit that there is such a thing as genetic diseases, as discussed in past chapters. If these examples don't convince you that most MDs are arrogant, closed-minded, and symptom-suppressive lapdogs for the pharmaceutical industry, then I don't know what will. Well, if you aren't convinced that Pete, by this point, is an absolute quack and an absolute danger to people's health by prescribing ridiculous drugs, and a liar and yes, unless he can actually prove that the cases he's presented here in this book on pages 68, 90, 69 and 70 are true, he's a liar. Until he can actually prove them, he's a liar. So that's chapter 12. Once again, Pete fails to provide any evidence that his medicines actually work. Instead, he relies, metaphysical, it's all spiritual. What are you meant to what are you meant to think beyond that? It's just so ridiculous that people think that this guy is somehow a medical genius. It's really distressing, it really is. And just reading that, even if that chapter alone I became, okay, this guy's a quack. It's just unbelievable.